Tyrannosaurus Rex needs no introduction. This iconic dino is arguably one of the most famous creatures to have ever roamed the Earth. Standing over 12 feet tall and measuring more than 40 feet long, it's hard to imagine anything more terrifying. And with a bone-crushing bite that was even stronger than that of C. Megalodon, there was truly nothing this dino couldn't chomp through. But did you know that the T-Rex wasn't always the ferocious giant we all know and love? In fact, its ancestors were pretty small, measuring just around the same size as your pet dog. And they looked a lot different as well, at least in some regards. To learn more about the humble beginnings of this mighty monarch, keep watching. You won't believe how small and unassuming its early ancestors were. Welcome to Paleo Logic. Today we're going to talk about the earliest known tyrannosaurid. Our story begins hundreds of millions of years ago with an ancient group of theropods called the Tyrannosauridae. Now, when you hear the word dinosaur, you may think of a gigantic fire-breathing lizard that's here to cause some serious destruction. But early tyrannosaurs were much different. In fact, they were barely even dinosaurs. During the Late Triassic period, when these guys were stomping around what's now Western China, the supercontinent Pangaea was still intact. But despite the vast distances between today's continents, life still managed to find a way to get from one place to another, and the ancestors of the T-Rex were no exception. They made their way from one side of Pangaean land to the other, eventually arriving in what would one day become North America. It was here that the first tyrannosaurs evolved, kicking off an entirely new lineage of theropods that would go on to include some of the largest and most fearsome carnivores the planet has ever seen. Early tyrannosaurs had relatively short, stout forelimbs and long, heavy tails, kind of like a crocodile. Their skulls were also fairly narrow and elongated, and they had relatively small heads compared to the rest of their body. These early relatives of the T-Rex were fast-moving predators that used their agility and speed to hunt down prey. Some of the earliest tyrannosaurs we know of are Guanlong and Dilong. These two genera lived in what's now China during the Late Triassic period. Both were quite small, measuring about 3 meters or 9.8 feet in length. And they probably weighed no more than 270 kilograms or 595 pounds. Despite their relatively small stature, they were still true tyrannosaurs. They had the same distinctive skull and jaw structure as later members of the family. They were probably just as fierce, too. Even though they were a lot smaller than the T-Rex, scientists think that guanacos and dabbling ducks were still fearsome predators. They probably hunted other small dinosaurs and reptiles that lived in the dense forests of their time, using their powerful jaws and sharp teeth to tear through flesh with ease. As far as we can tell, these ancient beasts walked on all fours. However, their arms were positioned closer to their torso than those of most other theropods, and this may have been an adaptation that allowed them to move more quickly. Compared to other meditine dinosaurs, Guanlong and Dilong had a relatively low number of teeth, especially in their front jaw. This suggests that they didn't just scavenge dead animals for food. Instead, they actively hunted live prey, probably ambushing their victims before they had a chance to react. We have several fossils of Guanlong and Dilong, but they're all pretty incomplete. So far, we haven't found any preserved skin, feathers, or other soft tissues, so it's hard to say exactly what they looked like and how they moved. However, based on their close relatives, scientists think that they had feathers, and that they probably used them for display, and maybe even to attract mates. The earliest tyrannosaurs were small, agile predators that ruled the forest floor. They were essentially the wolves of their day, working together in packs to bring down large prey. But as the Triassic progressed and the environment changed, these little guys started to disappear. Towards the end of the Triassic, large-scale volcanic eruptions caused drastic climate change that wiped out many species, including most of the remaining tyrannosaurs. However, one lineage survived, and it would go on to include some of the largest carnivores that ever lived. But the road to becoming the ape's predator was a long one, and it took tens of millions of years. During the Jurassic period, the supercontinent Pangaea began to break apart, giving rise to new land masses and new species. And tyrannosaurs were among the first to take advantage of this changing world. They quickly spread to new habitats and began to diversify, giving rise to a wide variety of species. Some, like the infamous Albertosaurus, were still relatively small, measuring around 6 meters or 20 feet in length. Others, like the fearsome Tarbosaurus, were true giants, measuring up to 13 meters or 43 feet long. These larger tyrannosaurs were ambush predators that used their size and power to their advantage. They could easily take down large herbivores and even other predators. But despite their success, they still had a long way to go before they reached the status of the ultimate predator. As the Jurassic continued, the climate began to change once again, becoming warmer and more humid. This led to the formation of new ecosystems and new species, including some of the first birds. But it also paved the way for the rise of a new tyrant lizard warrior. Tyrannosaurus Rex was the undisputed king of the dinosaurs, at least in North America. It was a true giant, measuring up to 13 meters or 40 feet in length, and weighing more than 7,000 kilograms or 15,000 pounds. It had a massive head, with a huge mouth filled with sharp teeth that could easily tear through flesh. Its legs were short but powerful, and it could move surprisingly quickly for such a large creature. With its size and strength, the T-Rex was the top predator in its ecosystem. It fed on a variety of herbivores, including the mighty Triceratops. And with its powerful jaws and sharp claws, it was more than a match for any challenger. The reign of the T-Rex was short-lived, however. Towards the end of the Cretaceous period, an asteroid that would eventually wipe out all dinosaurs was hurtling towards Earth. When it struck, it caused massive earthquakes, tsunamis, and a rapid climate change that made life on Earth nearly impossible. The T-Rex was among the many species that went extinct, bringing an end to the reign of the tyrant lizards. Tyrannosaurus Rex may be one of the most fearsome creatures to have ever roamed the Earth, but it wasn't always the mighty monarch we know and love today. In fact, its ancestors were tiny Proto-Raptors that looked more like turkeys than dinosaurs. Over millions of years, these small tyrannosaurs evolved into larger, more aggressive predators that dominated the landscape. They gave rise to some of the most famous and feared dinosaurs of all time, including Albertosaurus, Tarbosaurus, and the T-Rex itself. And although the T-Rex would eventually meet its demise along with the rest of the dinosaurs, its legacy lives on in the fossil record and in our imaginations. We hope you enjoyed learning about the history of the Tyrannosaurids and how they evolved over millions of years. If you did, be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. And be sure to give us a like for more Paleo Logic. And remember, old buddy, you're one of a kind.